Okay, so just starting again for everyone who's just joined us because we couldn't hear Keith earlier. So the first questions I had for you was what inspired you to become a filmmaker?
Well, I was very fortunate. I grew up in Kenya as a child, and the experience I had very young with wildlife cemented my mind that this is what I just fascinated by wildlife and wild places, and so I knew I was always going to be in that business. And I went to Bristol University and studied zoology there, and I went on to do a PhD, which was about bird flight, and I had to film a lot of animals with speed camera. So I got into filming that way for science. And then purely by chance, I met this amazing producer from the BBC Natural History Unit. He was interested in my work, and I got even more interested in his work. And when I finished my PhD, I crossed the road and went into the BBC. And so most of my career then grew from that. So I was very lucky. Not really planned, it just worked out.
Well, what an amazing opportunity to just meet someone and then, somehow networking just brings you where you want sometimes, which is amazing. Um,
Yeah, no,
Sorry, go on.
no, I'm a lucky guy.
And so actually that brings me nicely to a question that someone asked, which was for any listeners right now, viewers who are thinking of becoming conservation filmmakers themselves, what type of advice do you have for them?
I think the first step it's all about passion, and the first thing is, you know, if you really want to do it, you will have a fantastic time. Um, but if you're kind of a bit iffy, you hit all sorts of hurdles in our business. There's a lot of competition. There's quite a lot of hardship and roughing it in places and so on and so forth. But if you decided that's what you wanted to do, and then now really good postgraduate courses people can do. There's one that the University of West of England runs. There's British Film School runs one. So you can go down that road. But the other thing I always say is we love people with field experience. We love people who have, can climb trees in an amazing way, are divers and so on and so forth. So if you have a passion and you can develop that into becoming a speciality, do that, because then you can bring that to the filmmaking community.
That's really interesting actually, because I can think of a lot of people I know who are conservationists who do have these kind of specific skills of like being in the field.
Mm.
So it's an interesting one to hear that, you can think about that in terms of transitioning or potentially that can be an interesting skill set to develop.
Yeah, I mean, the key skill set as a wildlife filmmaker is working out what an animal is going to be doing in 10 minutes time. And it's no point noticing what it's going to do in 30 seconds time because you're not going to be ready to film it. You have to get into its head, work out what's going to happen in 10 minutes time. And that experience.
Mm. And I guess another
And
important aspect of, well, making films is also the storytelling aspect. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that and how you go about it.
yes, I think when I started my career, it was very much about we just wanted to film new animals, new behaviors, and tell the stories of animals. I think that's now changing with our times. It's now obviously with the environmental crisis. Certainly, I myself am moving far more into stories now about um, the the challenges we face and how we can overcome them. Because in a way, I think time has run out for us not to tell those stories. We got to tell them fast.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And actually, that's kind of linked to the next question I wanted to ask you. But first, I'm just going to take like a slight pause to remind everyone watching that if you have any questions for Keith, you can put them in the live chat and then I'll be able to read them out. So the next question I wanted to ask you is very much about how important activism is in conservation films, and is it something that you've seen changing in recent years, or do you think there's been no evolution in terms of activism?
I, it's always been activism in films has always been a double-edged sword, and the thing that the crucial thing with a broadcaster is you have to get the message to as many people as
Mm.
possible. A lot of people use the expression they preach to the converted. That sadly is great, but it's never going to change our world. It's never going to bring about the results we need. So what we have to do is we have to find ways and means of telling stories that will bring in as bigger audience as possible, and then bring the messages in. And what degree of activism you require. I'm never quite sure quite what an activist is. I view myself as an activist in the sense that I want to bring about change, but I might not necessarily protest on the streets and so on and so forth. But the crucial thing now is, how do we move as many of the global population as possible towards a conservation agenda, but also leaders and our businesses to a conservation agenda. And they're sort of similar, but they're sort of different.
Sorry, just checking on the live chat to see if there's anyone asking question. So, I mean, actually, I think it's an interesting topic, activism as well. I feel in the academic world, we do hear about it as well in the way of, should scientists be more activists? And that's something that have come up recently a lot, I think. So that's quite interesting to hear the perspective from, more the filmmaking side of things.
It's the balance is kind of crucial, and I think a lot of climate scientists now look back on and think, actually, no, they should have been more outspoken, because what happened is, by wanting to be completely scientifically accurate, they diluted the message of, we've got to sort this. And because people started picking their certainty as a way out of not having to do anything. So I think all of us have to think very hard about, we as filmmakers often were worried about losing audience by doing too hard a message. I think actually that was a mistake. But you can, the audience by and large wants truth, but it also wants truth delivered in an interesting and entertaining way. And you have to always strike that balance. If you want to do activism and you do it on television films in a boring way, or a depressing way that has no hope, you just lose the audience and you're wasting your time.
Yeah, so we've got a question from you from the chat. So someone, and it's actually connected to what you just said somehow. Someone is saying, when you're hoping a film will create change, how do you measure impact? And they're saying, they appreciate it can be different for different projects. So ask if maybe you could give an example.
Well, the best example I got, we made a series with WWF called Our Planet, which went out on Netflix. And actually, WWF did a huge amount of scientific research on what the Our Planet project did. It was both a series, and it was also, there's ourplanet.com, which is a big lot of content in other media. And they did a lot of actual science and audience research to work out exactly if it did have impact. And they proved, and I think they're going to publish on this basis, that it scientifically did have impact. It did actually change the way people think and the way they behave. So actually, that's the way you should kind of do it, because sometimes you think that you've made a big change because people talk about stuff, but you can't really measure it down the line.
Yeah, definitely.
The science. The other thing, with the Our Planet project, we specifically ended up trying to target big business. And with David Attenborough, we went to the World Economic Forum in Davos, which people don't think, from environmentalists don't go to Davos. But if you want to change the world, you need to change the way things are financed. You've got to change where money goes. You've got to change business. So that's a really important forum, and there you could just get the direct feedback from the people. We went to the IMF, we went to the World Bank, and so on and so forth. And the response from those things, people will tell you directly. In fact, the biggest moment we had was hearing Christine Lagarde say, David Attenborough speaking at the IMF changed the way she thought about how she would run the IMF.
Oh, wow.
And she actually said that. And that, you kind of know when she's an influential person, that'll bring about change.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I was wondering, so you were the series producer for Our Planet, is that correct?
Yeah, two of us were Alistair Fothergill and I. We
Yeah.
jointly series produced it.
So I was
Yeah.
wondering, how do you go about tackling such a, because that was such a massive project and it was quite different as well being on Netflix. So how was the experience on working on that specific program?
Well, we'd made through our careers in the natural history. Alistair, especially, he'd made the original Planet Earth series, Blue Planet, Frozen Planet. So we had experience in making what we call landmark natural history. So these big pieces. But the starting point with Our Planet was always different. It always was going to, as we said, try to move the dial. It was always going to have it. And the interesting thing, and we partnered with WF right from the word go on that basis. And Netflix really embraced that partnership. They thought it was great. A lot of broadcasters would find, partnering with a conservation organization, they'd be a bit nervous about it. But anyway, Netflix embraced it, and then what we decided to do is, how are we going to tell this story to reach a big audience? And we decided to really simplify the messages.
Mm-hmm.
So each program, we just thought would deal with one issue. And so if you talk about deserts and grass, one episode, lots of people, there are all sorts of problems with grasslands and conservation. But we thought, no, we're going to boil it down to what is the big issue, and it's space. Grasslands have to be big, and that whole show is just really focusing on the fact that grasslands have to be big. We did an episode about the poles, and there's all sorts of issues with them, but we boiled it down to it's about sea ice. Both the Antarctic and the Arctic ecosystems dependent on ice. So that show is actually all about ice. And so you each one, you just drill into one thing and say, actually, to save this place, you have to fix that problem. Grasslands need more space. The poles need their ice.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting format, actually. And, it was amazing seeing how popular the series got and how everyone got very excited, sharing specific scenes. And you would really see like a peak of activity on Twitter of people sharing specific details that they really enjoyed, which I thought was really nice.
And the crucial thing with Our Planet was, because we had the ourplanet.com, the website, which WF helped us with, if people had further questions, wanted more detail, there was a destination, and there's a huge amount of resource there to explain. So, if you want more space for grassland, well, how are you going to get more space for grasslands? It boils down to agriculture and how we change the way we create food and what we eat.
Yeah, that's definitely like a really important part of it. And I remember as well, it was quite nice to see that there was like Skype sessions for schools and they could like meet specific scientists and ask them about like specific things. It was just it just felt very interactive and, very global.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very proud of it. And it's for us, it's a model going forwards.
So I'm just seeing that we've got a question from a viewer. So Amy is asking if you could describe a project that has been particularly challenging and explain, why and how you kind of overcame it.
Wow. I guess any wildlife film is always kind of challenging in different ways. Probably the most challenging environment to work in is the ocean. And recently just did a film for Disney about dolphins and coral reefs, and the sort of challenge you have on land. You can go somewhere and you can find an animal and you can spend all day with the animal, and you could probably find it the next day and spend all day with it. You can have a continuous story. Underwater, you're kind of dropping in for an hour, and you hope, is your animal going to be there? And with a dolphin can show up for 30 seconds or a minute or a couple of minutes, and then with one flick of its tail it's gone and you can't follow it and you've lost it. So the challenge underwater is, how do you build stories? How do you make the best of that kind of spot checking way of making films to tell big kind of stories. And we try to overcome that by finding with scientists locations where animals, marine animals, want to aggregate, using new water. We used to use scuba tanks underwater for a lot of times. Now there's a thing called a rebreather, which circulates the air. And as opposed to limited to 1 hour, you can have 4 or 5 hours underwater.
Wow.
So you can really get to know animals. And they don't blow off bubbles, so they don't scare things. So it's a whole incremental way of what you do is you use a combination of technology, knowledge, and science to try and overcome the limitations of not being on ourselves.
Yeah, that's an interesting point actually, because I think we don't really necessarily think about it very often, but this industry of wildlife filmmaking specifically has to really go hand to hand with technology, isn't it? Because the development in technology really make a big change in what you can actually film. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's the two big drivers for us now. One is scientific knowledge and the work of scientists, both in discovering things, but also in getting them used to having people around them. And then it's technology is the other thing that, even a decade ago, there was no such thing as a drone. You used to, if we wanted to do aerials, you had to hire a helicopter or something like that. Very expensive on greenhouse gases, very expensive on dollars. Now you pull something out of your back pocket and chuck it in the air, and you've got the shot. I mean, it's extraordinary. And drones give you a very fresh view on the world. We're using them a lot with marine mammals, and we're seeing all sorts of new behaviors and stuff. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah, drones have definitely become way more popular. Even I follow quite a lot of like wildlife photographers, and it's definitely becoming more of a thing to use drones quite frequently, which is again quite the progress of technology then makes new things possible, which is interesting development.
Yeah, it absolutely does. That's always going to be on our side. Sadly, what's not on our side is the fact that our medium, our subjects are all in massive decline. So what we're being able to go and film is being destroyed before our eyes.
So actually looking at both in terms of kind of themes or in terms of specific species, is there any that you feel you really want to like work on next? Like, what is there a specific project that you've not done that you'd be really interested in working on?
Well, we're working on fresh projects right now. The one that I'm most excited about, which we're going to release this autumn, we've made a special film with David Attenborough about his life.
Amazing.
And it's David's witness statement. It's because the basic premise is that, I mean, David was he's 94 now, but born in 1926. And really, if you think all the changes that have really affected our world have happened in his lifetime.
That's amazing.
So and most of it has happened in the last 50 years. So David, when he started traveling, was seeing pretty of the world in a pristine state. And so it's that journey and him telling stories. And a lot of it is dark and quite emotional. And David, has really, in a way, come into that space to tell that story. But also then at the end of the film, it's looking at, okay, what do we do to get out of this mess? How do we rewild the world, which is what we have to do.
Well, so actually that links very nicely with, I've got a final question for you, which I've asked all my guests today so far. And that's, what makes you optimistic about the future of nature?
I think a number of things. First and foremost, the only way out of the carbon crisis is to remove CO2 out of the atmosphere. The only thing that can actually technically remove it at the rate it has to go is nature. So eventually the penny will drop that we have to have more nature. We have to rewild purely just to get carbon dioxide out, because we can't, the world will go into total chaos. We're having this on Skype now. We're not all together in a room. Our world has started to go into chaos. Pandemics come from the breakdown of the natural world, us breaking it down, species, pathogens crossing boundaries. So we're seeing what an unstable world is, and that instability gets bigger and bigger and bigger at an exponential rate. The only thing you can do to stop that is actually to rewild, because that gives you the stability. Pathogens, or whether it's against climate, or whether it's against whether it's to enrich our soil so we don't have an agriculture failure. That understanding is growing. The other thing that what we've shown in the last few months is that when we hit a crisis, humans are still pretty good at changing what they do. Everyone used to say to me, "Oh, you'll never stop people flying. You'll never stop people driving their cars. You never." Well, it happened instantly. If the need is greater, if people understand what we need to do to fix the world, they will change. The issue for us as broadcasters is to make sure that they understand. I mean, that we're up against really big challenges now, really big things, far bigger than coronavirus. And we have to identify them and fix it. The problem with these other things coming forward, there's no vaccine, there's no second chance. Once they kick off for hundreds of thousands of years. So we have to get that message across. But what we do know, we can change, we can fix things. And I think the message is getting across. That makes me optimistic. But we've got 10 years. We've got to fix it in 10 years. That's the answer. And we have after 10 years, it becomes very difficult.
Yes. But I see what you mean, though. It is inspiring to see that, we've managed to make so much change in such a short amount of time. So yes, it's giving me optimism as well to see how it's going to evolve. Then hopefully we can, keep doing a few of the things that we are currently doing and see how that goes.
And the interesting thing is, why did we make all this change? Because we were actually fearful of the problem. And the bit worries me slightly about the environmental crisis. People sadly do not fear it in the way that it needs to be feared. It's now, conservation should never be anymore. It's a defense issue. It's a global defense issue. And actually finance people like it, they understand this. All your investment, we've seen how one pathogen can knock out our economies, just like that. If you look at what agricultural failure and climate change and everything are going to do to our economies, we have to defend ourselves from that thing. And that is invest in nature.
Well, I think that's a very good note to end on. And thank you so much, Keith, for answering my questions today. It was really good having you on.
It's a real pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Goodbye.
Bye.